Talofa lava to you and all the listeners.
I see you moving around and about. I see you busy today.
A little bit. It's just a Monday in Auckland before we head to Wellington tomorrow. It's always busy in Auckland. There's a lot going on.
How often do you get to have time away from the beehive, Carmel?
Yeah, so most weeks we're down there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. For those of us that are front bench in opposition, we're down there on Mondays sometimes as well. But most weeks, I guess, probably I don't know how many sitting weeks we have a year, but usually we'll sit for 2 or 3 weeks and then we'll have a week off. But when I say week off, it's not a week off and go on holiday. You go back to your electorate or you go to other parts of the country and you go and meet with our communities and you do all those things that matter.
Man, so how many weekends do you get to spend with your family throughout a year?
Uh, quite often you won't get a full weekend, but I do try and avoid events on Sundays where I can. So that I can be home. I got told off Sunday just yesterday because I was busy doing a whole lot of funerals and the whole family went to church and I didn't go with them. And apparently the priest said that church should come first, which I know is true, but um, I'm falling short.
Wow, that's a huge sacrifice for any member of parliament, especially those of you guys that have you've been in government, and it gets more. Does it get more busier when you're in government?
It's different. I think in some ways it's still busy in opposition. We've got more time though to go and meet with people and groups that perhaps it was a little bit harder to do to meet with when we were in government as ministers. We can spend a little bit more time with people. I think that's important, and that's a big part of being in opposition. It's rebuilding those relationships. Not as much reading, because in government every week you get so many papers to read and things to sign off on, and so it's more of that relational stuff. Yeah, which is important and I enjoy.
Hmm. All right. Well, thank you for giving us a little bit of an insight of what it is like to be a member of parliament and, of course, to be deputy prime minister when Labour was in government. Now, let's talk about the number of people that are unemployed. Carmel, what's your take on this?
Yeah. Well, we knew that this was coming, but under this government, it's far worse than we thought it was going to be, and even Treasury, far worse than Treasury forecast. We've got 148,000 New Zealanders out of work. Of course, what happens when unemployment is high is that it's worse for Māori and Pacific. For Pacific, it's 9.9 percent of Pacific peoples are now unemployed, but the worst figure is that 24.4% of Pacific youth are unemployed, which means 1 in 4 of our young people are. It just goes to show how when the economy isn't going well, then it's our people that suffer the most. And just, one of these statistics haven't been bad since 2021 when we were in the midst of COVID. So there were reasons why there were a whole lot of people that were unemployed or losing jobs. So I think this government have a lot to answer for.
Hmm. What would you have done differently if you guys were in government?
Well, we wouldn't have laid off over 6,000 public servants. That has not helped the situation. On top of that, the government have stopped or paused many of our building, construction, and infrastructure projects, whether that be the property development in our schools, our hospital developments, our public housing builds. And so we've got 10,000 fewer jobs in the building and construction industry. Many of our people would be impacted by that. And when you lose jobs and en masse in places like the public sector and building and construction, like I said, there's a flow-on effect, eh? And so then it impacts other businesses and then they have to lay off people. And so that's exactly what we're seeing at the moment. So I don't think that the government can pretend that they haven't had a hand in this.
Hmm. Well, it seems like a whole lot of New Zealanders and Kiwis as well, are immigrating to Australia. What could is this part of it?
Well, this is part of it because they're seeing fewer opportunities here for themselves. What we're seeing is that net migration, I think, is some of the highest that we've seen. I think in July we'd lost over, I think, 55,000 people with respect to net migration. Now, we've trained up some of those people, you know. We have done a lot of work to get our people trained up in the trades. We did a lot of work to get people trained up in the health workforce. That's another area where there's a pause on hiring. And so some of our new nursing graduates are coming out. And despite the need and the fact that we certainly need more nurses in our hospitals, the jobs aren't necessarily available because the government haven't funded them to hire the health professionals that we need. And so, you know, I really can't stand the fact that we have invested in these qualified New Zealanders and that they're taking their skills and everything that they can contribute to Australia.
Mm. Well, the nurses can't help themselves, Carmel, when Australia are offering 120K, 130Ks. What can the government do to improve this situation with the unemployment rate?
Well, what they need to do is actually look at how they can support job creation. It would be helpful if they got back on track, because they've gone completely off track with respect to our building and construction industry and all of those infrastructure projects that need to be built. It would be helpful if next time round we see more than the investment we saw into health and education at this year's budget, because at this year's budget it was just enough money to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, a whole lot of people have been losing jobs or not able to be employed despite the demand that we're seeing in the health workforce. And so, you know, there are some things that they can do. Also stop laying off public servants, because that is not helping the situation and it's putting pressure on the rest of the public service and jeopardising our frontline services for people. So those are some of the things that they could certainly do.
Well, the government have been saying ever since they started that the Labour coalition, have been wasting money away, especially during COVID. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know what they mean by wasting, because if I think about one of the biggest spends as Minister for Social Development, it would have been the $19 billion we put towards a wage subsidy to help businesses retain workers so that New Zealanders didn't lose jobs and businesses didn't go under. Now, that was a big chunk of the COVID spending, but at the time, businesses and New Zealanders who would have otherwise lost their jobs were very grateful for the fact that that meant those businesses could keep rolling and keep paying their staff. And so we were in an extraordinary situation, and I think that we made some really hard choices, but by and large, I think we made the right investments.
There's a lot of companies going under, Carmel, and what should we see in the next couple of years?
I think it's a reminder of how reliant we are on each other. And we can't forget that kind of system of humanity and that system of reliance that we have going. You know, if there are people across different sectors that lose their jobs, then that flows on to others, and that includes business. Now, I know that some are celebrating the idea that getting tax cuts from the coalition cut is no good if you have a job. Cut is no good if your business goes under. And so, you know, I am really concerned for the lay of the land and the landscape at the moment.
All right, and what is Labour currently working on? I know the elections are a bit further away, but what would you guys do differently right now in this sort of situation to help our economy and, of course, decrease the percentage of unemployment?
Look, we had made some cuts to the public sector and spending, and I think that was necessary, but not to the extent that this government has made. We would have continued to focus on investing in education and health and housing in those areas that desperately need a focus from consecutive governments. That would have meant that we would have retained the employment levels in those areas as well, and would have been still providing opportunities for New Zealanders to work. At the moment, we are listening to New Zealanders and we're asking, what do you want us to do? You know, what do you think our policy should look like? Next year, you'll start hearing from us what our policy will be that we're planning on taking into the next election.
Mm. All right. So, what's on your plate for the rest of this week before you head back to the Beehive?
So tomorrow heading to Wellington for the sitting week, but also the apology to survivors who have been in state care. That'll be an incredibly emotional day, I'm sure. After that, because of the nature of the apology, the House will lift, and then we'll go back and we'll resume normal business the following day.
And when will you be back in Auckland and back with the family?
So I'll go down tomorrow, and I'll be back in Auckland on Thursday night, and then this weekend we celebrate my dad's 80th birthday. So we'll have a few more family over this weekend.
Well, it sounds like you have a bit of time with the family, Carmel. Thank you very much for coming on to the program. We'll leave you with one last opportunity to say something to our listeners.
Well, my friend, I can't even hear you properly all of a sudden. It's gone very quiet on my phone. Are you there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Are you?
Yes.
What did you just say? Sorry.
What would you like? What's your final word for our listeners today?
Well, for our listeners, I think it's getting closer to Christmas, and I just want to recognise the fact that some of our families out there are really struggling. I guess just look after each other is the message, and hopefully we can all go into this Christmas period and get a break and spend some well-deserved time with our families.
It's been a pleasure having you on the program. Can't wait to hear from you again and more from the Beehive, Honourable Carmel Sepuloni.
Tailava.
Yeah, manuia le yaso le. Tumaita sa ave mo mua. Yeah, masui pa le mio le tanto malo New Zealand. Honourable Carmel Sepuloni pe ona ye le tulanga foi. O le si tia I lunga o le tulanga o le Freedom Mirror le. O tangata ua le inia la tungalo ngai tutonu o New Zealand